All right, everyone. Good morning and welcome to BSides Las Vegas. This is the Proving Ground. This talk is the SOC Counterattack by Mathieu Saulnier. A few announcements before we begin. We'd like to thank our sponsors, especially our Inner Circle sponsors, Critical Stack and Volleymail, and our stellar sponsors, Microsoft, Robinhood, and Secure Code Warrior. It's their support, along with our other sponsors, donors, and volunteers that make this event possible. One note before we begin. All cameras, all mics, unless you're in the underground track, should be assumed to be live and on. So with that, please silence your cell phones. And if you want to ask a question at the end, I will be floating around with a microphone. Please raise your hand and I'll bring it to you so that YouTube has the benefit of your question as well. Thanks.
Hello, welcome to this talk called the SOC Counterattack. My name is Mathieu Saulnier. You can find me on Twitter at ScoobyMTL. I'm a senior security architect at Bell Canada, which is one of the largest Canadian ISP. My roles are threat hunting team lead and adversary detection team lead. I'm also giving a talk at the Blue Team Village Sunday at 11 about how to use Bloodhound for Defender. So if you're interested, please come along. At this point of the presentation, you might wonder, is this guy mentally challenged or does he have an accent? Well, according to my doctor, it's because I'm French Canadian that I speak like this. You will notice that I will or not pronounce H's in front of words, then S's at the end of words. Or I might add them where they don't belong, but don't worry, bear with me. I'm also a big Star Wars fan, so this presentation, like all the other I gave before, is heavily Star Wars themed. I will talk for food, meaning that I'm here on my own buck. So if you want to invite me for lunch or dinner or a beer, I'll be very happy for that. Now, here's the agenda. So first of all, we're going to do an attack overview. We're going to talk about the attack navigator. Then I'm going to tell you how you can make a successful preliminary assessment for your corporation. We're going to talk about open attack and open source project. And finally, we're going to talk about how building detection based on attack. Attack overview. What is attack? Attack stands for adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. It is a knowledge base of adversary behaviors, or TTPs. TTP stands for tactic, which is the why, or adversary tactical objective, what they want to perform. Credential access versus persist on your system. Technique is the how adversary achieve a technical objective. The procedure would be the exact ways that they're doing that. For example, using Mimikatz to read LSAS password in memory or doing password spray. Attack focuses on real attack. It doesn't contain all the attack under the sun, only those that have been known to be used by adversary in the wild. It also provides a common language for the blue teamers, the red teamers, the community, and the vendors. So when we talk about the technique, we all know exactly what we are talking about. It is open source and actively maintained. It is community driven. And if you want to learn more about attack, you can watch the talk from here, right here last year, Attacking the Statu Quo by Kathy Nichols and John Wander. By the way, the last slide of the deck contained a link where you can download the whole presentation, so you don't need to take a picture of every slide. This is the pyramid of pain. This is a simple diagram that shows the relationship between the types of indicators you might use to detect an adversary and how painful it is for an adversary if you deny them those indicators. As you can see at the bottom of the pyramid, there's the hash value, and at the top there are the TTPs. Attack focuses on TTPs. If you want to learn more about the attack framework, the pyramid of pain, here is the old but gold blog from David Bianco, the pyramid of pain. Now we're going to talk about the attack navigator, and we're going to get started with our preliminary assessment. This is a screenshot of the attack navigator. As you can see on the top here, you have the 12 tactics. Here you can see only 10 because otherwise you would have been able to read anything. Right here at the top, there's a little plus sign that you can use if you want to create new layer or import layer that others or yourself have created in the past, because you can save all of this in JSON format with all the information. Right here is the legend, which is probably one of the most important features for me of the navigator, because this is where you say what your color code means, because when you go back maybe in 3 months or 6 months and loading your information, if you didn't write the legend, you probably won't remember what those shiny color means. Here you have a search button. So for example, if you want to know where Bit's job is and you cannot find it, you just click it and boom, it's right in the middle. Right here you have the multi-select tool. So if you want to know, for example, you want to know all of the techniques that Mimikatz use, you go there, you type Mimikatz, and they're all going to be highlighted. Same thing for threat actors. If you know that your company is being targeted by APT3, for example, you go there, you type APT3, and all the technique will be highlighted. Now we're going to talk about how to make a successful preliminary assessment. For that, you need to choose the basic questions that are right for your environment. So here are a list of questions that you might use. First of all, logs. Do we have logs? What is the complexity of building that detection? So do we think that we're going to need a simple filter? That we need correlation between various data sources? Do we think that we're going to need anomaly detection, or maybe machine learning, AI, and all of those fancy stuff? What is that's the complexity? What's the severity if this technique happened to us? High, medium, or low? What is the probability of being hit by that technique? For example, if the technique is against if the technique is against OS X and you do not have any Mac in your environment, the probability will be very low. Do we have dependency on other? This might be important in larger organization. So just imagine if you have to have your Windows admin, your IIS admin, your database admin, your WAF admin, your firewall admin, all on the same table to get all the logs that you need. That's going to be very complex. Targets. Again, in larger enterprise, it's maybe more relevant. In small ones, probably everything is in scope, but in larger environment, your stakeholder might tell you you should start with workstation or you should start with servers, and even maybe some exact type. Is there any open source project that can help us speed up the development? I will cover some of the projects that you might want to use in order to speed up your project. Whoops, sorry. I want to go back on the data sources because this is really the core. If you don't have any data sources, well, you won't be able to detect anything, obviously. So every technique comes with a list of data sources that you can actually use to build your detection. So you could just count how many you have out of them. You also need to have an inventory of your data sources so you know which one you can focus on getting. For example, Sysmon will be used to detect roughly 70% of all the techniques in the matrix. So if you don't have Sysmon or something similar in your environment, this is probably one of the first things that you want to get. Then you can start planning on your retention policy. So based on your deferred team needs, you might want to store logs for a different amount of time. For example, you might want to store firewall logs for 3 months, whereas you may want to store your Sysmon for 6 months. Once you know that, you'll need to know how many EPS or event per second that source is getting. You will need to know how much it costs your enterprise to store data in hot, warm, or cold storage. And when you have all of that information, you'll be able to calculate you'll plan your retention policy. If you want to learn more about how to start with data sources and attack, there was an excellent talk called Quantify Your Aunt, Not Your Parent Red Teaming by Devin Kerr and Roberto Rodriguez that was presented at BSide Charm last year and also SANS Differ Summit. Now, once you need to choose the right question. When you have the right question for your organization, you need to assign them points or weights. After that, you can score each of the TTP based on that score, and then you can run a script to apply that score or that color to your JSON file. You can do it manually, but honestly, 244 right clicks and coloring is extremely long. And once you have that, it's going to be something like this. For example, how many log source do I have for this technique for 35%? What is the probability of being the target of this? Does this affect Linux server? Because my management said you need to focus on Linux server on our DMZ, for example. Is there any open source project that can help me? 10%. Then you're going to get something that looks like this. Between 0 and 35, red or low dev priority, orange, medium dev, green, high dev priority. It's going to look somehow like this. Again, if you don't have your legend in 3 months, maybe red mean for you that you have to focus on that right now, and you might get it like all reversed. Once you have that, it's time to create a new layer that you can call your progress and save that somewhere where you have versioning. So So you can show month over month or quarterly over quarter after quarter how you are. So here is an example of what it could look like after quarter one. So you can see that bits job is in green, meaning that we have alerting, and hardware addition is in orange, meaning that maybe we have a dashboard that we look at on a regular basis. This would be Q2. So now we have 15 techniques that we cover. We can see that we have some improvement, especially on hardware addition that is now green, meaning that it went from a dashboard to a live alert. So maybe we add a new data sources that help us weed out the false positive that we had before. If you have all this information, you're going to be able to answer management questions very fast. For example, March 19, Red Canary released a threat detection report, and here is the top 10 of the technique that they've seen used in a while. As you can see, PowerShell is leading by a big margin. So with that information, we could tell our management within 5 minutes that we covered 9 out of 10 of the top 10. The very next sprint, we start working on the one that we didn't have detection for, and now we cover 100% of the top 10. And all the remaining 30s, because I believe there were 40 total TTPs in there, we bumped their priority by 15%. So now we know which one we should focus on. After that, you need to start knowing your enemy. How can you do that? First of all, you can start doing threat modeling. So you wouldn't attack a retailer for the same reason you attack a media company, for example. So if you're after a retailer, maybe you're after a credit card number, maybe you want to reroute goods to an address you can, or maybe you want to change the price of the goods before you actually buy them. You would attack maybe a media company because you want to go after the sources to either silence them or buy them out to make them change their stance. Maybe you want to edit an article in order to make it say something different. Maybe you want to write an article in a credible media, or maybe you just want to deface the website and have as many people as possible see your message. Once your threat modeling is done, you can look into threat actors that are after your vertical. That will give you, you can also start following researchers that focus on those threat actors, and that will give you a list of TTP. And you can give a priority to those TTP that are, you know, that the threat actor that are your vertical are using. Now, of course, management will need metrics and KPI. So there are good metrics and bad metrics or pitfall. The good metrics would be showing a monthly progression like we saw a few slides ago. You could show your coverage. You can also show how you prioritize your data ingestion. You need also, maybe it's important, well, not important, but it could be a good thing to show alerting versus hunting. So alerting for me is when you actually send an alert to your SOC, whereas hunting is more a dashboard, a report that you run on a daily basis, or even a query that you run on a regular basis. You can show maybe if you have just one detection or if you have multiple detection for that technique. Now let's talk about the pitfalls. Assuming that all TTPs are equal, for example, we talked about PowerShell versus, for example, bash history. So with PowerShell, you can leverage roughly, well, almost all of the technique in the framework, whereas bash history would be monitoring one file per user directory. So very different scope. After that, falling for depth versus coverage. If your team is scored solely on the number of green they put in the matrix, they might be enticed to do very simple detection for each of the technique and move to the other one. That could leave you vulnerable. If we take the PowerShell example again, if your team decide that they will detect only base 64 encoded payload, it's good, but it's probably not enough because that will leave you vulnerable to download codes using registry for persistence, for example. Some TTPs are not met for alerting. For example, file creation, file deletion. If you create an alert for every file that is created or deleted in your environment, your SOC will go crazy. They'll lose faith in your detection, they'll lose faith in attack, they'll lose faith in you, and most importantly, they'll probably just leave. I know I would. Yeah, converting all the rules from a project into an alert is also a big pitfall, and I'm going to talk more in detail about that in a few slides. If you want another methodology, if you want to know more, about the pitfalls, there's a talk presented last year at ATT&CK called 5 Ways to Screw Up Your Attack Program with Attack. Now we're going to go into attack and open source. First thing first, the Sigma project from Florence Roth. Those are generic YAML files, and there's a converter from those YAML files into almost every CM language that you might use. This is the coverage of this project, and then there's over 200 rules. If you take those 200 rules and you convert them into alert, then your SOC will be flooded and they'll be pissed off. So a better approach would be to concentrate on the TTPs that are important for you, choose a number that you can actually handle, maybe 2 to 5, depending on the size of your team. When you soak that for a few weeks, and when you're happy with the level of noise, then you put them in production and you take the next few rules. Next project is Sysmon Modular from Olaf Hartong, which map attack technique with Sysmon detection. This is the coverage of that project. If OS query is more your type, don't worry, Filippo Martini got your back with his OS query attack framework, and here's the coverage of that project. Olaf Hartong strikes again with his Splunk threat hunting app. Here, if you're not using Splunk, don't worry. You can open the file, you locate the search string, and here, for example, you'll see that it's Sysmon ID 1, and we're looking for a command line that is very specific, or some process name that are very specific. This is the coverage of this program, but be careful, it's called threat hunting and not threat alerting, so those rules are extremely noisy, so you need to tweak them if you want to make alerts out of them. Once you've built a lot of detection, it's time to test them. An Atomic Red team from Red Canary does just that. Those are small and highly portable tests that you can run against your environment. Red Canary is really involved in the community, and they have a Slack channel where you can discuss various techniques and how to build detection for them. They also run Atomic Friday once a month. It's a webinar. You can assist. It's free. This is the coverage of the Atomic Red team. I want to thank Tony Lambert for providing this to me a few days before the slides went live. Now let's talk about how to build detection. So this is the process that we are using. I already covered pretty much in depth how we identify which TTP we're going to work on. Then we go into proof of concept, which is basically building a filter to see how much noise this rule generates. Then when we're happy with the noise, we develop it or we create the alerting pipeline. Then we train our analysts, and we go live, and finally we evolve based on the false positive that occurs. One of the very first technique that we tackled was MSHTA. It was, at the time, it was used in various hacking tools, and we thought that MSHTA would not be very prevalent in our environment. We searched in our logs, and we had 0 hits. So that was quite easy content. Every time you would see MSHTA, generate an alert. We build the training, we put that into production, and to date, we have 0 false positive. When we weed out all the ones that we thought were very easy or very like one filter, we started looking into bits job. So we looked for bits job and the start bits transfer, which is the PowerShell version of it, and we saw that we had a few hits on all of our endpoint. We thought that was pretty interesting, so we start researching process creation or Sysmon ID 1. We saw this is the command line that is in the technique in the Meyer framework, so we start looking at that. Then we did some defense evasion, Daniel Bohannon style, and we noticed that it's very easy to truncate any of those words to avoid your detection. So we thought this might not be the best way to detect this technique. After that, we looked into file creation or Sysmon Event ID 11, and we saw something interesting. Every time you're downloading something with bit, it will create a file called bit 3 alphanumeric character.tmp in the directory where you launch the comment. We saw that almost 100% of our hits were in that directory. Anyone want to take a wild guess what that directory is? No? Windows Update. So we could easily whitelist that domain because it is only writable by administrator. And if someone actually used bits to download the file there, well, you have way bigger problem than a new file in your system. Then we look, so we built the detection pipeline. We built the training. We put the detection into production. And once again, we have 0 false that rule. Run DLL32. We searched for run DLL32 in our logs, and we had gazillions of hits. We built the alerting pipeline. We did whitelisting for months. We built the training. When we were satisfied with the level of noise, we put that in production, but it kept on generating lots of false positive every time someone would actually install a new software, or we integrate a new business unit or a new set of server. So what we did is actually convert the rule into a dashboard that we review weekly. We are also looking into doing some anomaly detection based on process, parent process and stuff like that, but right now it's still too early to put it there. Conclusion. Here are the few takeaways for you. First of all, ATT&CK addresses the highest level of the pyramid of pain. It is important to perform a preliminary assessment of all the 244 techniques in the ATT&CK framework. For that, you need to choose the right question for your enterprise, because trust me, it is very painful to go over 244 questions a second time. Technique, I meant. You should track your progress somewhere. I recommend the Enterprise Navigator. Here's the link for it. You should use open source project to help you build your detection, but be careful of the pitfall. Do not confuse alerting with hunting, or two very different things. And when there's too many false positive, well, don't just use dashboards. So also for file creation and file deletion, there might not be for alerting, but they're very good for forensic. So once you have, one machine that is compromised, it might be good to have that dashboard where you see actually everything that was done on the system as of file creation, file deletion, that might give you good ideas where to investigate. Last year at Blue Team Village, there was a talk called Stop, Drop, and Assess Your SOC, which is another way or methodology to get started with ATT&CK. And here's the link for that talk. Finally, I want to thank Grifter, Pyrotech, and Daniel Bohannon for inspiring me to come here today and submit this talk. I want to thank CyberOps, Olaf Hartong, Filippo Mottini, and Red Canary for the open source programs that they put to the community. And of course, none of this would have been possible without MITRE Corp releasing ATT&CK framework at the beginning. Finally, Bell and BSide Las Vegas to give me the opportunity to talk here today. As promised, here is the link for all the slides. And again, you can find me on Twitter at ScoobyMTL. Thank you very much.
All right, we have time for one, maybe two questions. Anybody? Awesome.
I think you mentioned that 70% of the TTPs relied on Sysmon. Do you think it's still useful for a SOC that relies mostly on network-based logs?
Yes, but most of the techniques that are in the ATT&CK framework are based on the host and not on activity on the network. And that's one thing that I think I forgot to mention in the pitfalls. I think I skipped this one, and that's maybe why you have a minute extra. But not all the attacks are in ATT&CK. Only those that have been seen used by attackers. So sometimes you'll have to build something, and you have to show your management that you're doing something outside of the ATT&CK framework. So that would be one of them that you need to show, but not with using the ATT&CK Navigator. So thank you, because you just reminded me that I skipped something.
And then we do have one more thing for you, Matthew. All right, let's thank Matthew again for his talk.